Every person's story has something to teach us. How others view life, how obstacles are overcome, how joy is felt, how fears are faced, how love is expressed. The Matters of Faith podcast explores individual stories of people's lives and how faith plays a part. It may not be your story, but it may help shape yours. And now, Matters of Faith with your host, Jay Wilburn.
You have found the Matters of Faith podcast on Project Entertainment Network with your host, Jay Wilburn. This is episode 199. I'm going to have Kyler Marlowe on in just a moment. Her first episode would have been episode 84. That's before we were doing video recordings as well. And part of that title is Being Gay, Christian, and Sober. So we're going to follow up on a few of those, as well as a new podcast that she is beginning that I'm very excited about. Are You There, God? It's Me, I'm Queer. So I'm all those things and many more things we're going to talk about. Before we get into all that, if you want to contact the Matters of Faith podcast, you can email me at mattersoffaith@jaywilburn.com. That can include questions or comments about this episode or any past episodes, and you can also talk to me about advertising opportunities. We'd be happy to get your passions before our audience and help you share your products and services. And now we will get into the rest of the episode. This is the Matters of Faith podcast on Project Entertainment Network with your host, Jay Wilburn. My guest today is Kyler Marlowe. Welcome to the program, Kyler.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Good to see you again. As I mentioned in the introduction, we talked all the way back in episode 84, and there have been a few changes since then, but let's talk about some things that may be going on. How is sobriety going for you?
It's great. I'm coming up on 3 years in 6 days. January 1st.
How does that process compare now to maybe, a year ago or 2 years ago, or even like in the first few weeks? Sort of what's different and what's the same in that particular type of walk?
The only thing that's the same is that I'm still working the AA program, but with the pandemic, that has looked very different.
Yeah, I imagine.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. All of our meetings shut down, and we started meeting on Zoom instead. So it's honestly been kind of cool because I've been able to go to meetings all over the world and meet all kinds of new people. I actually even started my own meeting on Zoom, and if it weren't for the pandemic, that wouldn't have happened.
Right.
So it's honestly been really good for my sobriety. Not everyone feels the same way about their walks with their sobriety, but I think it's been really cool. And I've grown a lot in my sobriety and in my personal walk with God as well. And I definitely feel like I'm stronger. I honestly don't even think about drinking anymore. But I also know that I have to stick close to my program,
right.
or that will definitely falter.
What are some of the pressures that other folks have expressed? Like, how does the pandemic change the pressures on them as they try to stay sober?
Mostly just lots of isolation. It's a disease that requires us to be social with other alcoholics and to work with other alcoholics. And so when we can't do that, and we're told the opposite of what our program teaches us, which is not to isolate.
Right.
When everything shut down, it was kind of like we were forced into that. And I don't like to speak for others because it's not my place. But for me personally, I know that I saw a lot of my friends go back out and start drinking again. There have been so many people in Nashville that I know through the grapevine that have relapsed and died.
Oh my goodness.
The amount of addiction-related deaths this year is scary and so heart-wrenching. And every single day, I'm so grateful that I was not one of them, and that I was able to just keep doing what I knew I had to do. Every day I wake up and know that I'm powerless over alcohol and any other mind-altering substance I put in my body, and I kind of had to accept that I couldn't drink no matter what. And so I don't make excuses anymore. I don't even think about drinking. And when I do, it's very fleeting and it comes and goes really quickly.
That's good to hear. Now, another change is that you did move. What prompted sort of your move to Nashville, and how did that change your life as you were kind of making your own way forward?
Yeah, so it was shortly after our first podcast
Right.
together on matters of faith that I moved. And that whole first year of sobriety, I had been trying to move to different places, and they always fell through.
Uh-huh.
And I was still kind of learning how to have a relationship with God again since coming out at 18. I got sober at, 24. And I kind of just started praying for direction. I got mad enough to surrender my will and try to, stop controlling everything. And I just said, God, I'm over it. Like, if I'm supposed to move, I know I will, but just show me where I'm supposed to be and open the doors to make it happen. And so on my birthday in 2018, which I was 10 months sober at the time, I had an old friend message me, and we were catching up, and she was telling me happy birthday and telling me about how she just got divorced and she wanted to move. And long story short, we ended up moving to Nashville together, and all of the doors opened so flawlessly and everything fell into place. And it was really interesting because Nashville was not even on my radar, and I had never even been to Nashville. I knew nothing about it except that it was Music City and there was a lot of traffic. Like, that's all I knew. But because of getting sober and learning how to navigate my relationship with God again, I just kept holding on to that faith that God was showing me. It was very obvious that I was supposed to go there, or things wouldn't have happened the way that they did.
Right.
And this, the program of AA has allowed me to act on that faith and trust in that faith. And it still hasn't steered me wrong. I moved to Nashville the day after Thanksgiving of 2018, packed up my U-Haul, and my friend drove it for me and helped me move. And, the first time that I set foot in Nashville was when I opened the door of my apartment with all of my stuff. So it was a bold move, definitely not one that I could have done without a higher power of some sort guiding me, because otherwise I would have been way too scared and way too chicken. Most people don't just move without even visiting, but I did.
Right.
And I don't regret it at all. And, it was interesting because once I got there, everything kind of fell apart. But I kept holding on to that faith that God had so effortlessly displayed to me getting there.
Mm-hmm.
So, when I tell this story, I tell people, like, I held on to that faith that got me there. And I knew that God did not uproot my life and bring me to Nashville just to drop me now. That was the mindset that I had, and that absolutely got me through. And, today I'm the happiest I've ever been. And I'm so glad that I made that move.
It's interesting because people a lot of times trying to hear God's voice or the universe or whatever they feel like's guiding them. A lot of times we try to figure it out by, okay, are things going well or are they going badly? And it's also possible that things can be going really well, but you're meant to be somewhere else. It can be possible that things go badly and that's a sign that you're on the wrong track, but it's also possible things can go badly and you're still meant to fight it through. Like, that's the test that's going to get you to the other side or whatever. How do you go about identifying the difference, like the times where bad times or good times are a sign that you're meant to stay, and then the times when it means you're meant to go? So how did you know the difference?
I think that with big life altering decisions that are very much God led,
Right.
Is kind of when I know the difference. So, if I think that if it had been like a smaller, insignificant decision that I made and it was going wrong, I would still pray about it and I would still seek God through it. And I don't know. I feel like I've gotten really good at recognizing the signs, whatever they may be, from God, to kind of direct my path. I don't really know if there's a defining, action or like defining thing where I know the difference. I think it's different every time. But I always feel like I know what that right decision is, because as soon as I'm unsure, I pray about it and I dive deeper into my program, and deeper into my sobriety.
Hmm.
And I talk to my sponsor, about big decisions, and get her guidance, because she is my spiritual guide through the 12 steps. And she's lived a lot of life prior to me, being sober.
Right.
So I feel like I have those spiritual guides and people that God has placed in my life, where I kind of like to bounce ideas off of them. And at the same time, I knew I try to seek God and pray a lot, and I always feel like I get what I need.
Now, another big change, if people go back to episode 84, they're going to see a different name on there. Can you tell me about the name Kyler and what that means to you?
Yeah, so that didn't change until after Nashville. I was in Nashville for maybe a few months, um, before I got a new sponsor in the program, because it's always recommended to have a sponsor that lives in your city,
Hmm.
so you can meet with them face to face. Now, of course, this was before COVID,
Right.
so now it's kind of more normalized to have a virtual sponsor.
Right.
My current sponsor actually moved back to Florida, um, after living in Nashville for a few years. So now we're virtual, and she's still my sponsor, and that's not going to change.
Uh,
So AA itself has seen a lot of like different approaches now, and
hmm.
has kind of changed a lot of the way that they do things. But my physical sponsor in Nashville, when I moved, we were just working through the steps, again from the beginning. Because that's also recommended when you get a new sponsor, is to start from step one, no matter where you were with your previous one. So the more that I worked through the steps with her, and the more that I was kind of coming into myself after being a year sober, I kind of started to wonder if maybe I was more non-binary, or maybe even if I was transgender. And that was not something that I ever saw coming in active addiction, because for alcoholics and addicts, whenever you drink or use, it completely changes who you are, and you kind of turn into this person that you were never supposed to be,
Right.
I think. And I think it was something that had been buried, just like my sexuality, being a lesbian. I didn't know, that I was a lesbian until I was a little bit older. So I started exploring that. I started talking to friends that were transgender, and like, what kind of feelings were you having? Like, how did you know? And I started praying about it. And I prayed about it a lot, and I just kept working the steps with my sponsor, and started realizing, like, I think the first step is to change my name. And I chose Kyler because it still started with a K. I really like having K as my initial.
Yeah.
And I wanted a name that was more unisex, androgynous, not super girly, not super masculine.
Hmm.
And so I did some research, and I just kept looking at baby names that were like, I guess, different, because I also didn't want a common name like my old name,
Yeah.
which was very common
Yeah.
and forgettable, I feel like. Um, and I landed on Kyler, and I had heard that name before several times, back in Myrtle Beach. There was a guy that I used to work with named Kyler, and then a friend whose son was named Kyler. And I really, really liked it. And the name means little warrior. So that was kind of my selling point. I also really liked that there was still a Y. So I still had the K, I still had the Y. And it was, easy to say, and it just felt right. It felt right. So that's what I chose. And then I kind of just chose Ashton as my middle name, because I liked the way it sounded with Kyler.
Hmm.
So that's kind of how I landed on that. And I tried it out for a few months, and then June of 2019 is when I legally changed it.
Now, speaking as a straight white middle aged male, a lot of times folks sort of in my category, and especially my generation, spend a lot of time playing catch up and trying to navigate changes in the society. Some of us do it better than others, but this is probably one area. It seems like something that would be small, but it seems like one area where the straight community sometimes trips over themselves trying to deal with the fact that name changes like this in the LGBT community is not unusual, would be appropriate to say, and it has a deeper meaning for the people who do that in the LGBT community than a lot of times I guess the straight community identifies it. You have more than a few straight people who just kind of say, well, they're just, they'll use the word like phase, or they'll use a word like, oh, they're just, okay, now they're just playing around, like if you were picking a name for a game or something. And so it's unfortunately, it's diminished a little bit in its meaning sometimes when it's looked at from the outside. Can you kind of explain, maybe from your perspective or the perspective of some of the people why these kind of things are bigger than just, oh, I just decided to change my name for the fun of it?
I think it's hard to understand if you don't personally experience it.
Right.
But I also think that it's just, a matter of simple respect.
Right.
That, you don't have to understand something to respect it. It's kind of the same as, for example, like I don't personally practice polygamy, but there are people that do.
Right.
There are people that have a boyfriend and a girlfriend, and that's not something I'm ever going to do, but I'm not going to sit there and tell you like you're wrong, like this doesn't make sense. I'm going to respect it. I have a friend right now that I used to work with years ago that is in a relationship where the guy that she's with has her as a girlfriend and another girl as a girlfriend. And that is not something I would ever do. I don't share well. I don't share my women. But, I support her, and, I've never seen her so happy. And, I think that it's just, people just need to learn how to respect one another, even if they don't agree or understand. If you're not hurting someone or killing someone,
right,
like I don't see an issue with doing something that is like, I guess, different from the societal norm.
Right.
And I think that as the world like shifts and progresses, I think that societal norms will be completely shattered anyway.
Right.
And it will be more normal to, be transgender, be non-binary. Yeah, I think it's just a matter of respect. If, when I changed my name, I didn't change who I was. I was still the same person. If anything, I was just more true to myself.
Right.
And I'm happier now. I'm happier having a more, androgynous name. And I've even, changed the way I dress. I don't wear makeup anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are so many things that are different now since I've really come into myself. And I'm proud of myself for that. I'm proud of, where I've been and where I am now. And I just kind of stopped caring what people say and think. And if people aren't supportive, it's been really easy to just cut them out. So.
Right. What has the response been like when you look back at people that knew you in an older city with a different name, and maybe even people who knew you before you came out and that sort of thing? What was sort of their reaction to this change of name and maybe some of the other changes as well?
So when I first changed it on Facebook, I got nothing but support.
Mm-hmm.
Now a lot of that had to do with like, since I'd been sober, since I'd moved, I had kind of removed a lot of people from my friends list. I went through and thought about, is this person gonna like be happy for me that I moved? Is this person gonna talk to me when they see me on the street? Is this person supportive of me being a lesbian? And if they weren't, I just removed them.
Mm-hmm.
Acquaintances, people from high school that I wasn't actually friends with.
Right.
I removed from my friends list. I don't do like you're an acquaintance, I'm going to add you on Facebook now. I used to, but I don't do that anymore. So all of that was really, really supportive. I have friends that, it did take them a while, and they would accidentally call me by my old name, but then they'd correct themselves and
Mm-hmm.
they'd apologize. And that doesn't bother me at all. My parents, it's been hardest for my parents.
Yeah.
They still call me my old name, but it's just because it's a habit. They're still getting used to it, and I understand that, and I recognize that. It doesn't bother me. And it would bother me if they were doing it on purpose.
Right.
But I've never had anyone do that. I've had like one guy that I met here that was a total a-hole about it, and
Yeah.
I just like blocked him. I was like, okay, like I don't care what you say or think anyway, and I guess we're not friends like I thought we were.
Right.
So like, bye, snip snip. Like it doesn't
Yeah.
it doesn't faze me at all. But it's been mostly positive.
That's good to hear. That's really good to hear.
Yeah.
Kind of jumping forward a little bit, and maybe this might be the reason why we decided to have another conversation. You've recently started a new podcast, Are You There, God? It's Me, I'm Queer. And it's kind of interesting, of course, because, you and I spoke on this podcast, which deals with faith and maybe a little more broadly than a lot of faith-based podcasts do that maybe have a more specific agenda. Tell me about that podcast, why you started it, and what the idea is behind it.
So since I've been sober, I've kind of had the idea in the back of my head, like I want to do something that matters. I want to do something that changes the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we can't change the world, but we can change it a little bit at a time.
Right.
And my experience with faith, as you know, has been a little bit rough. And, that was because I grew up as a Christian, and I was taught to be this way and to believe this. And then I really struggled later on when I realized that I was gay, and I didn't think that I could have both. And I think that a lot of it comes from that pain that I experienced, but instead of using it in a destructive way, I wanted to use it in a constructive way. And I knew that there were other people out there just like me that know that they can have both. But I also wanted to be inclusive of all religions.
Right.
So whatever God is to you. And that's something that I learned in AA. Like, we were just discussing like how to respect something if you don't understand it.
Right.
Before AA, I didn't understand any other religion or any other higher power except for mine. And that was something that I still believed after growing up the way that I did. I was not open-minded. I was not respectful. And on top of like learning how to stay sober, I learned how to respect other religions and other beliefs. And a lot of that is because I was seeing people stay sober with a higher power of their understanding that was completely different from mine. So obviously it's working for them. Obviously, whatever they believe in is working. So I think that, it was a lot of things. It was a lot of, learning about other religions, learning about other higher powers, learning how to respect that. And just hearing more and more stories like that are so beautiful and moving. And I just want to shed light on that. And I want to teach people that like the things that you say are hurtful and you cannot hide behind God while you do it. That is not who God is. And my image of God growing up was completely tainted. And I learned who God really was when I got sober. I did not learn who God really was in a church.
Right.
And my beliefs are still kind of the same, but they have differed a little bit. And I just think it's really important to hear from these people, like especially in the LGBT community. I just want to hear their stories, and I want to see how they navigate their relationship with God now, being out like I do. And I've gotten an overwhelming amount of responses from people that have been interested, and I've already done 5 interviews, and I'm releasing new episodes every Wednesday, and right now I have enough people interested to keep it going for like 4 months.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's been, so it's kind of like another thing, how we were talking about how God opens those doors and it's supposed to happen. That's how I feel about this podcast.
I'm really excited to hear that. How destructive has it been, the way that the traditional Christian church has handled the LGBT community over time?
Oh gosh, so destructive. It's so toxic, and I hate it because people like to pick and choose from the Bible what they like to twist it for their own selfish gain.
Right.
And I kind of feel like not even in the Christian religion, but in every religion, there's always some kind of like negative thing to say about homosexuality.
Yes.
And what's really interesting, like since we've recorded the first episode, I did a lot of research on that and on the Bible specifically, and learned like the verses about the super famous like Leviticus verse in the Bible that talks about homosexuality isn't even about homosexuality, but the way that it was translated makes people think that.
Right.
And it's been really interesting to like teach people that and like see the look on their faces. And it's just so easy to like hear one thing and twist it and just carry on that belief. And it's been so destructive. I mean, a lot of LGBT kids who kill themselves do it because of their church and the way that they were treated by Christians. And I think that is so backwards, because it's supposed to be the opposite. I think that if the church had done their job, you know, in the name of God, truly done their job in the name of God, I don't think that I would have fallen into my alcoholism as heavily as I did or as early as I did. I think that my life would look very different today. But on the same token, I believe that everything happens for a reason. And I think that now, because of where I am now, you know, if I didn't experience things the way that I did, I wouldn't even have a podcast. I wouldn't have I wouldn't have stories to tell. You know, I wouldn't be able to be doing God's work. And I really do feel like I am doing God's work with this podcast, by sharing my story and sharing my experiences and bringing other people in, you know, who have also been able to reconcile their faith. And maybe their faith looks different today. Maybe their higher power is completely different today. But I am still a Christian, and I've been able to realize that I can absolutely have both. And it doesn't matter who says what or who thinks what, because the only thing that matters is what God thinks of me. And I know that God loves me, and I know that God created me, you know, the way that I am for a reason.
There's plenty of failings of the church if you go far enough back through its history, especially. But the greatest modern failing of the Christian church, I think, is the treatment of the LGBT community. And I know that it should be expected, you know, just looking at the history, it shouldn't be a surprise at all, and I guess it's not. But it's kind of heartbreaking how easy it was, you know, like other failings of the church, there were enough people speaking out that you had sort of a counter protest going. And I suppose the same thing's true about LGBT issues, but it's not as widespread. You don't have as much of the minority opinion within the church speaking out enough. Even if you don't even get into the argument of the verses themselves, if you just say, I don't think we're treating LGBT people the way that Jesus would want them treated, even if you don't get into the theology at all beyond what would Jesus do, there's not enough of a counter voice out there saying that, you know, what we're doing is destructive. And it is unfortunate that it's such a crossover between faiths. These faiths that can't stand each other somehow can't just fully agree on this. You know, we don't agree on any other theological issues, but for some reason, not liking gay people is just so easy that we can all line up. Which is it's insidious. It's as evil as any other evil you can name in the world. As tough as being a Christian within a church setting that identifies LGBT, we discussed a little bit earlier about the opposite side, where you know, especially in a community that has been so trodden upon by the church, someone within their ranks that identifies as Christian, are you still kind of getting some anything from strange looks to push back on that part of your identity, the fact that you still hold on to your faith after what you and many other people have experienced?
Not to my face. I don't know how they feel. I don't know how they feel behind closed doors, but here in Nashville, I've actually found a really amazing church that they're not affirming, but they are accepting.
Okay.
And I think, you know, there are some LGBT people that won't go to an affirming church, but I kind of think that it's a good start. You know, I think that it's kind of up to both of us. I think that it's up to me to like attend this church and kind of continue to like break those stigmas. And I think that it's a big step that such a big, well-known church all over the world. It's called Crosspoint Church. It's such a great church. They have members all over the world. And they're not affirming, but they also don't preach against homosexuality. I walk into church holding hands with my girlfriend, and I've never gotten any weird looks. Their like slogan is nobody's perfect, everyone's welcome, anything's possible. And I think a lot of times that churches will like put the gimmicks on the front of the door to like get people in, and then they don't actually practice what they preach.
Right.
But I don't feel that way about Crosspoint. And actually, when I first moved to Nashville, I wanted to try out for their worship team, and I had emailed the Nashville campus pastor, and I was completely transparent with him. I was like, look, like I want to do this, but I'm not going to do this if you guys are going to turn me away for being gay.
Right.
And I didn't even expect a response. And if anything, if I did get a response, I figured it was going to be what I didn't want to hear.
Right.
But he made time to call me on the phone in the airport when he had like a 30-minute break between planes because he was traveling somewhere. And he called me and he was like, hey, it was so nice to meet you last week. I remember you. I just want you to know that our church would never, ever turn someone away for being gay. We have people on the volunteering teams that are gay, and we love them. And we would never, ever tell them that they're going to hell or that they're wrong. You know, we treat everyone with unconditional love, just like Jesus does. And I was floored. I didn't know what to say to him.
Right.
You know, it's a big church, and the fact that he called me meant a lot. Even if he called me to tell me what I didn't want to hear,
Right.
it made a lot of, like, I respected him so much for even taking the time to do that. And to call me and tell me that. But like that being said, like because of the way I grew up, like even though I've come such a long way, I still haven't tried out for the worship team because I'm afraid that like someone would kick me out or someone wouldn't accept me because I'm gay. Like even though he told me that that won't happen, I still have like that little fear inside.
Right.
Like because of the way that I was raised, that like I wouldn't be good enough or I wouldn't measure up, and like I'm still working through a lot of that. You know, like it's really hard to unlearn behaviors and unlearn things that you're taught as a kid. And you know, like that's all a part of the journey. And I think that I'm definitely like better than I was. I think that I've come a long way. But you know, I still hold myself back sometimes because of things that the church taught me.
Right. Just for people listening in, can you explain the difference between affirming and accepting? Like what would qualify a church as affirming as opposed to one that's accepting?
So affirming means that they would marry you in the church.
Right.
If a church is non-affirming, like my church, they will not marry LGBT people in their church. But that doesn't mean that they don't accept you. And I almost sometimes think that like some churches aren't affirming because they still want to bring in those people that are so hateful and they want to teach like who Jesus really is to these people. It's almost like a compromise, I think, sometimes. That's how I like to look at it, because if I was a pastor, I don't know, maybe I would do that, maybe I wouldn't. But you know, it's all about teaching like the true teachings of Jesus to people and teaching people how to love. And I have never felt more loved as a lesbian, like an openly gay Christian in a church the way that I do at my church.
An interesting line a lot of times with churches, because that idea, and I like how you put it, where it's easy to put the saying on the door and then, okay, well, let's open the door and see how that plays out. And unfortunately, I've seen the opposite, even among churches that I would consider, I don't know if progressive's the right word, because that carries some political connotations to it, but ones that are trying a little harder to make the slogan outside match the inside, I guess you'd say. And unfortunately, I see where it falls a little bit short sometimes, and it's kind of in that part where it's like, okay, well, we'll let them in, but what are they allowed to do? So like, not, you can't be a minister. That would be like what a lot of churches would start with, and it's like, well, we're not going to marry them. And that's where you move away from affirming too, as well. But then you get into like that, I guess where the real line starts to define itself is even, are they allowed to volunteer? Like, can they be a part of can they be on a team at all? Can they lead a team? Can they deal, are they allowed to work with the youth group? All these things that kind of show, okay, well, how much do we truly care about a person? But I've seen churches where, being gay goes on the same list as like, you're not allowed to drink alcohol if you're volunteering. You're not, so you're part of the list of no-nos at that point. And then it'll even go so far as to like, if they suspect somebody's drinking, they'll bring them in and have a conversation with them. But unfortunately, they'll do the same thing if they suspect a person's gay. Like, okay, the girl you're living with, are you just roommates? Or, and you'll end up having that conversation. And that bothers me to a great degree, regardless of what the church thinks or claims to think. Partly because I think they're more likely to have the "are you gay" conversation than they are to actually track down whether someone's drinking. Because and you've mentioned, I guess you've talked about a little bit here, because you talked about that even being told that it's okay, you're a little reluctant to even test out their word, I guess you'd say. Is it partly that line, that idea that like even churches that claim to be accepting will sometimes draw those weird lines?
I think so. It's actually really interesting. Like, I haven't ever personally been told that, but I know people that have.
Yeah.
And my mind likes to run away with things a lot, because I'm an alcoholic, and that's what we do. That's how we're wired. And I think that it's mostly other people's experiences that make me weary.
Yeah.
Because like I said, it's never actually happened to me, but I've also never tried, because I'm terrified. I'm afraid of rejection. And I think sometimes I feel invisible, in churches, and, I kind of like let myself, like, that's what, I guess generalize holding myself back because of that. And it makes me feel really good when like for example, the other day we were at church, and one of the members of the creative volunteer team came up to me and was speaking to me, and she was like, "Did you get your Christmas gift for like creative?" Because I had signed up to be a volunteer, and I kind of just fell through the cracks. I don't think it was because I was gay. I think it was just because it's a big church, and I wasn't like, communicating well enough, and I had a lot going on in my life at the time. And, she remembered me. She remembered my name, and I introduced her to my girlfriend, and, she kept talking about how like, we need volunteers. Like, if you're interested, like, please let us know. Like, we need volunteers. A lot of people don't want to serve right now because of COVID, and, all of that. So it made me feel really good, that she remembered my name, remembered my face, and obviously knows that I'm gay. And like reiterated, like, by the things she was saying, like, I don't care. Like, I don't care if you're gay. I don't care if you like chocolate ice cream more than vanilla ice cream. Like, I don't care. Like, you believe in God, you believe in Jesus, and that's all that matters. Like, and I think that a lot of my fear is because of other people's experiences, not my own. And, a lot of times, like, I have nobody to blame but myself for holding myself back. And like I said, it's a journey. It might take me some more time. It might not. But I have been trying to be better about reaching out more and staying more connected with them. And my girlfriend has been encouraging me to finally try out for the worship team. And, I keep saying that I'm going to do it. And I'm eventually I will, when I'm ready.
Before we go, just kind of going back to the podcast, like, who do you hope listens to the podcast, and what do you hope they get out of it?
I mostly hope that people who are intolerant and use their intolerance in the name of God will have a total change of heart. I hope that they will start doing research and learn about how the things that they've been taught their whole life are totally wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I also hope that parents of LGBT kids will start listening to it and think about the way they've treated their children. Because 9 times out of 10, it's scariest to tell your parents, especially if you grew up in a religious household.
Right.
But I also hope that people like myself, LGBT people that grew up in the church and fell away from it, I hope will listen to it and realize that, like I said, their image of God was completely tainted because of what they were taught. And I kind of hope that it will bring them back to God, whoever God is to them, whatever that looks like for them. I think it's a multitude of different people that I hope will listen to it. And even maybe straight people that, are not allies and are totally against it. I hope that we will gain more allies out of it.
I think that's an excellent vision and an excellent set of goals. Where do people go if they want to pick up your podcast and start listening to it?
So we are on. I'm on Spotify. That seems to be the most popular. I'm on Google Podcasts, Anchor, Breaker.
Yeah.
There's one other one. I think it's called Pocket Casts.
Okay.
And I think that's it right now. It's supposed to be getting released on Apple Podcasts as well, but it usually takes the longest.
Yeah, it'll get picked up eventually.
To be released there. But yeah, it's mostly on Spotify. That's where a lot of people have been listening to it. So it's pretty it's gone really well so far. I'm really happy with the analytics so far.
That's awesome. And I'm going to be listening to it, and I encourage everybody else to. And also the title's unique enough to where when you put it in the search, it usually pops up pretty good. But definitely check out on any of those platforms. Thank you for being on, Kyler.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been great to be back.
And hopefully we'll talk again soon, and I'll definitely be listening in as we go along. Thank you, everybody, for listening in, and I look forward to talking to you again next week.